Men of Reddit, what are the struggles of dating a very rich girl? This is probably gonna get buried, but I've always wanted to write it out. I was never sure how rich she was. I just knew her family had property in a couple places in the US and China. And this is also how I found out property in China is dumb expensive. When she went for the holidays, if she wanted to stay in Shanghai and then go to Beijing later, she didn't have to look at hotels or Airbnb. She just had to make sure she grabbed the right set of keys. It was weird. She wasn't dripping with designer clothes and drove a fuel efficient compact, but just looking at where her family had apartment houses, I can only imagine. She was a super sweet, down to earth girl. Biggest heart in the world, very hardworking, and acted like a child in a candy shop everywhere she went. I think the biggest strain came when we would eat together. For me, money was tight, and the best way to stretch my college scholarship money was to cook meals in bulk. Before she met me, she ate out literally every single meal. At first, it took some adjusting and rebudgeting. Bless her heart, she understood and found compromises. She loved my cooking and would surprise me with groceries and then say I have to pay her back by cooking whatever she wanted. Every once a while she'd pick up the entirety of a bill that we were supposed to split, but she always found a way to make sure I didn't feel down about it. I don't think she ever once bought me an expensive gift. Most things were either handmade or were very thoughtful. For example, shoes I'd been eyeing for months but couldn't afford, and she noticed them my computer browser. I miss that girl. I hope she's doing well. Pretending to pull out your wallet when it's time to pay for anything, then asking, "Are you sure?" I dated a pretty rich girl. Her dad was a prominent lawyer, her mom a successful artist, and her uncle was a 1980s pop star. Honestly, they were great people to be around. They were old money and not snotty or overly pretentious. Yes, they had a big ass old house and drove quality, not overly flashy, cars. Yes, they had whatever they wanted, but not at all in a look at me type way. I on the other hand was dirt poor. I mean, in the early 90s grunge was a blessing for me because I looked like that already. But her parents didn't care, and we are always very welcoming. Her mom even took me to my first punk show. I guess it's true when they say cash screams and wealth whispers. My girlfriend, now wife, wasn't rich herself, but had very rich parents, both lawyers, one in family law, the other in corporate counsel, but they were pretty normal during her upbringing. The law careers and massive salaries came when she was a teenager. The toughest thing was that her parents would offer to pay for nearly anything, but later try to use that as leverage to control her when they didn't like what she was doing. She was college aged, so it happens a bit. Parents and teenagers aren't perfect. Things like stop paying for her car suddenly or reneging on a trip that they offered to pay for and she booked and was suddenly on the hook for the cost. It was certainly toxic from their end, and she kept falling for it each time. However, in her 20s, once she was out of college and employed, she didn't need their money, so anything that was offered with strings attached or had the potential to do that, she could just decline. They learned pretty quickly that manipulation via finances isn't a good way to foster a relationship with your daughter in her 20s. Her mom figured it out, her dad not so much. For unrelated reasons they got divorced, and her relationship is still very strained with her dad. I dated a senator's daughter in high school. Everything was about keeping up appearances, and we had to be careful where we went in public and stuff like that. Her parents offered to get me nicer clothes to wear when we went to dinner in public, but I felt weird about it. Relationship didn't last long. I'm not good at being political. My roommate was very wealthy and her boyfriend ended up living with us for 2 years, and I remember they would have the solemn fights all the time. He came from a very poor household, tough family life, in a not so great area of the city, didn't graduate high school, etc. He was supporting himself working as a bartender. Compared to his childhood financial situation, he viewed supporting himself with a steady job as being successful, whereas she was always wanting him to do more, be bigger, etc. They also fought a lot over birthday gifts, Christmas gifts, etc. She would buy him really expensive gifts that he needed, but couldn't afford to buy himself. He needed new winter boots and a coat, so she would buy him really nice ones for Christmas. A good coat and boots with 1 or 2 other items can easily get close to $5-600. He could never get her a gift of such magnitude. She was somewhat understanding that he couldn't pay for something like that, but he used to tell me he always felt a lot of pressure to match her really expensive gifts with really creative ones. He said he would dread holidays, Valentine's Day and birthdays, because he would get so stressed out trying to constantly think of creative ways to match her really expensive gifts. It seemed to me like he was getting really bitter about having so much stress over creating a gift versus her being able to spend 5 minutes using her parents' money to get him something. I think it was also tough because she wanted to do so much stuff and had the financial security to do it. She wanted to travel a lot and he just couldn't afford it. She would pay for him sometimes, but that bothered him. I met up with them once when I was living in Thailand, and she kept using phrases like "this is so cheap for." Like she would insist we got to the most expensive restaurants in the area because a comparative restaurant in the States would be way more expensive. She also had a massive inheritance. She doesn't have access to it till she's 35, but he used to tell me he was so bitter that he would probably have to work his whole life until he was dead and would probably never make enough to really retire, whereas she could basically stop working at 35 if she wanted. They dated for 4 years, but it eventually fell apart. Keeping up with her, she wanted to go on European trips, expensive vacations, expensive restaurants, etc. She made very good money, and I was limited in my funds and had to spread it out. I couldn't just fly to the Caribbean at the drop of a hat. So, in turn, she left me for a guy who could edit. Wow, that took off. I wasn't expecting to hear from so many people. Thanks you all. The thing is that I have money, a great career, etc. We dated for 2+ years and had a great time while together and did a lot stuff. As a matter of fact, she was probably the best GF I had ever had, but the underlying thing was that no matter what I always felt this feeling of not being enough. She doubled my salary, if not a little more, in the 6 figures. In the end she admitted to wishing I had more financial freedom and that it bothered her. It hurt like hell to hear something so personally insulting from someone I loved. So she found someone who was in her tax bracket, so to speak. I dated a girl from a wealthy family when I was in college, and I was very poor. The most frustrating thing for me was that our definition of a crisis was so different. From month to month I would literally not know whether I could afford my rent or be able to put gas in my car, and she would be freaking out about some, to me, minor social issue, or whether a store carried a fashion brand she liked. It definitely made things difficult, and I had to remember that it's your perspective that dictates what is a crisis and what isn't. It was honestly a lesson I've tried to remember over the years. If you're coming from a very poor family, as was my case, expect a lot of butting of heads when it comes to financial issues. I was raised very poor. Now I make a decent amount of money, but if I'm ever in a situation where I have a lot of expenses and may run into financial issues, I tend to panic a little bit and plan my spending extremely carefully. My wife came from a wealthy family and she never had to deal with financial struggles at any point in her life, and she doesn't quite care about spending a lot of money. Basically, she doesn't think past the fact that we can afford something. She doesn't think about possibly needing money in the future, and that's where we always butt heads. In short, make sure you ask her to let you know before she spends more than X amount. That was the solution we came up with, and it has actually saved us from a lot of financial trouble. Spending should be a thing you both agree on, otherwise it's not going to work out. I married one. Nothing to do with my wife at all. She's a gem. It's my Mill's expectations and image are always the center of just about every single decision. Phil, the real rich person, is cool as hell, though. I dated a girl in college that came from a very wealthy family, Texas oil money. Like, she flew from Dallas to Florida, where we went to school, in her dad's business jet. That kinda rich. I think the biggest thing for me was how out of touch she was with everyday money issues. For example, someone smashed into my car in the parking lot, and I was totally upset about it. She was like, "It's okay, you can just get a new one." She had no concept of how insurance or deductibles work, and she didn't understand that I could not simply go out and get it fixed right away. Another example was that she wanted me to go to Miami to see a U2 concert with her. She had like front row tickets. I couldn't go because I had to work. She didn't understand that my boss would not give a shit about how cool it would be to see U2. This was before they sucked. She was always doing something. Constantly going on trips, or to the openings of expensive restaurants, or traveling to her parents' vacation house, or getting tickets for some opening night or something. It was frankly exhausting. She had money and she wanted to spend it, and I just couldn't keep up. I say had, because it was entirely her parents' money. She was in grad school, though she was struggling at it, and otherwise had absolutely no work or experience. Outside of a restaurant, she barely had any life experience either. Admitting financial struggles. When my wife and I were dating in university, her family invited me up to their cottage during the break between Christmas and New Year's to ski, skate and otherwise play in the snow. I wanted to go, but I didn't know how to ski and had no outdoor clothing appropriate to be out in the snow. No ski jacket, pants, or boots. I declined the invitation, but my then girlfriend was really sad and asked why. I had to admit I didn't have the gear needed, and I couldn't afford them. She then passed it on to her family, and when I visited them on Christmas Day, they led me to a room with 3 types of everything new with tags, laid out on a bed for me to choose from. It was a wonderful gesture, but I had mixed feelings. I appreciated the gear very much, but I felt like a charity case. Also, managing expectations of my wife for travel and expectations with children's activities. She was used to jetting away whenever they felt like it, and had her own horses growing up. That's just not an option for us. We do okay and we are happy, but horses are not financially viable. Everything was about the family's image. Everything didn't last long. Yep, mine was always reminding me how much money she had, and her family had. I consistently reminded her that I don't care, and that wasn't the reason I was dating her. I was an aspiring lawyer and she an aspiring artist. She came from a rich family and I grew up in a bad social economic area. My parents were refugees back in the 70s. Basically never knew how rich she was until I went to her hometown for her brother's wedding. Apart from the amazing apartment her parents had, they had an empty apartment in the downtown area for guests that I could sleep in. Easily the fanciest place I've stayed at. Oh, and her older brother, that was in the family business, had to go to the factories they owned to do something. Relationships started to take a hit when her dad blamed me for his daughter's dreams of being an artist. I only made her believe in herself and to choose her destiny herself instead of letting her parents force her into the family business. She changed her major from business management to art without me knowing, and her parents freaked out and blamed me for it. I couldn't really handle the drama and law school, so we ended things. Last time I checked her out she was in an art school somewhere in Europe. Seems like she's still living the dream. Edit. Just to clarify, I didn't wanna break a happy home or anything. My ex had severe anxiety and depression about her major that her parents chose for her. She was never happy at uni and that's why we talked about her choosing her own life. Second edit. Wow, this blew up. Never watch the movies people are typing as comments. Seems like a lot of movies have the same premise as my story and people umming me telling me I'm lying. I'm really not. I didn't wanna put out too many details cause I don't wanna out me or her in some way. In the end you believe what you want to believe. Nothing. There was literally nothing wrong with dating a rich girl when I was poor back in college. I had a good major, was an athlete, and her family loved me. I didn't have money to give her flashy gifts, and she didn't care. If she wanted a Birkin, she'd just shop with her mom. I didn't have money to take her on fancy vacations or trips. We'd just go skiing at her parents' condo, and I could always find a way to scrape up some money to get myself there and everything else would be taken care of. They didn't care that I wasn't an appropriate suitor at the time. I was just a college kid and must have done a nice enough job of presenting myself that they knew I'd figure it out. It was an awesome relationship, one of the least stressful relationships imaginable. We eventually fell out of love for other reasons, but I look back on that time fondly, and we ended things amicably. Still on good terms with the family too. I can't say very rich, but my wife and I definitely come from different socioeconomic castes. Her family was upper middle class, and mine was just above poverty level. She just didn't understand the panic I felt when money was running low. She didn't know the dread you get when your car starts making a strange noise and you know you can't afford to fix it. For her, everything would work out because she had parents with money to swoop in and make it all better. In short, she never understood the struggle and wasn't very smart with her money. It's not even that she wasn't smart, it's that she wasn't the same sort of ingenious that poor people are with stretching every penny. Eventually, we both got decent jobs and managed to put back a good savings, and we both grew to understand each other's money habits. She had no self-realization of our financial differences and how that means experiences in our lives are drastically different. She lives in Texas and would fly to New York City for the weekend, go to Hawaii, California, or Florida on a whim. When she asked me what I wanted, I was always really major, because that's how I live. I don't need the most expensive item, but for her, that was all or nothing. Eventually she learned to respect and almost envy my way of living. She enjoyed my simple life, but then it turned out she was a total sociopath, so she may not be the best example of dating a rich girl either. When people weren't gifting her things, she would just use her dad's black credit card to get it. She was a very selfish woman. Edit. Not rich but more than middle class. Meeting the people she knows. It's hard to talk about my average self when my audience is a collection of some of the most gifted, driven, accomplished people I've come across. For instance, the first friends she introduced me to, one had temporarily quit healthcare, traveled the world making a documentary, and then spent 6 months delivering healthcare in some third world country, returning a few weeks before we met, and the other had entered into sports journalism, and is very quickly climbing the ladder to one of the most reputable newspapers of the nation. After hearing them share these interesting stories about each other, it came to me. I'm sat there, trying my best to make I fixed up a rental property, then spent 4 hours a night studying every day of the past couple months. Sound interesting? This happens almost every time. Theoretical physicists, accomplished sportsmen, artists, and a lot of medical students, professionals. Then me, a glorified white van man with aspirations on something I should have studied 7 years earlier, instead of going straight into the workforce with a forklift license. Vertical bar. Constantly balancing their lifestyle expectations with your salary. I went through it as a 23-year-old making $42K in Manhattan. A carefree weekend without pre-gaming can blow your entire monthly discretionary income. I dated this girl while in college. She never mentioned anything. She lived a simple life until I went to her family's place for Thanksgiving. Right off the bat, her mom did not like me. I respect everyone, but if you try me, I go hard. Her mom told me that she would feel more comfortable if she had my social security to do a check on me to make sure I'm not a felon or something. I asked her for her social security to make sure her money was legit and that if me and her daughter had kids, they wouldn't end up having grandparents in jail. We are not together now. Not the man, but the rich girl. I hope you guys are interested in my story. I come from a family who built their way in the world and got very wealthy. Growing up, my parents had me and my sister working regular jobs, so we would learn the value of money. It worked. Back then, I was not allowed to date anyone until I was 18. Not that I ever cared, because I was a nerd and preferred my video games to real people. When I got older and nature decided to kick in, I was starting college, and I met a guy. He was very handsome, and did not seem to care who my family was. I was pleased, because most people would fake to be my friends, because of my background. That lasted until I met his parents. He was from a lower middle class family and his parents were all about the what are the neighbors going to think mindset. They are so excited about me that they started being so weird, buying a Mercedes that they could not afford, buy nice clothes, expensive wines. The guy just got terrible after a few years. We moved together in a very nice downtown condo and he went mad. He loaded his credit card to buy expensive watches, suits, shoes. My dad got him a job in a good company and I guess he thought he was a big shot now. I left him about 6 months later because he was trying to change me into a trophy wife. He was getting upset if I did not have my coupon or if I was gaming in my PJs all day night because you know, if someone would have knocked the door and I was dressed like that, what would they have thought? When I left, I was still paying for the condo he was living in. His parents were harassing me about their son's future and trying to manipulate me into going back. I'm not that stupid. I tried to get him to buy me out of the condo. He did not want it to. We got into a massive legal fight. It was terrible. I have other stories if you are interested. Sorry for the English, not my first language. Edit, spelling.